Welcome to the O2 and today's panel session. So I'm very proud and privileged to be moderating or emceeing today's panel session, which is titled The Transformational CIO, the New Digital Era. 2016 will no doubt go down as a decisive and phenomenal year for CIOs. On the digital transformation we've seen, or our peers have and predecessors, we've seen the first, second and third industrial revolutions, and they have profoundly changed our predecessors' lives from steam power through to electronic power and through more recently to electronics and information technology in the late 20th century. We are now creating a fourth industrial revolution, the digital revolution, altering, so far, a narrow range of activities such as electronic banking, very topical with Tesco's, e-commerce, that has been happening since the late 20th century. At the same time, the remit for the CIOs has been phenomenal. We've seen in the wider commercial aspects this year, we've had Brexit, Brexit plus. What does that mean for our organisations? At the same time, the cybersecurity challenge increases. We saw the recent Ocean's 11 heist on Tesco Bank with 40,000 accounts being pilfered in a matter of hours. So the challenge of the CIOs is increasing. Today, I'm joined by a phenomenal CIO panel that will be sharing their insights and expertise during the panel sessions. Before I introduce them, I would, as Jason said, request you to embrace slido.com. We are looking, people are ahead of us, to actually crowdsource questions. So if you like questions on there, true Excel factor, vote for your favourite, and we'll then place those to the panel. So with no further ado, I would now like to introduce my panel. We have from left to right, Sandra Ashmore, Jean-Francis Teno, Kelly Olsen, and Conor, Whelan. So welcome, ladies and gents. To formally start the panel session, I'd like to ask my fellow panelists if they could kindly introduce themselves and also share what their key challenges are for 2016. So, Sandra, thank you.
Sandra Ashmore. I'm a former CIO with BP. I left about 18 months ago. My big challenge is now creating an interim portfolio career, which is becoming very common at a senior level now, and accessing that whole gig economy, which ties into a lot of the, how is the digital economy turning, jobs for life, long-term employment is now changing quite a lot. So my experience for years in corporate world and then moving into this whole gig economy and digital and dipping in and out is phenomenal. And it's something that as CIOs we've got to start to look at how we can access that experienced workforce without wanting to manage people's careers and how you dip in and out of things. So that's me.
So I'm Jean-François Teno. I'm COO and CIO of AXA Investment Managers Real Assets. So real assets, just think property, toll roads, solar farms, that kind of things. I guess what keeping me awake at night, because that was actually the question you asked us, is trying to turn, to be among the ones that turn this industry I work in from a very old-fashioned way of doing things, very slow. Real estate is so illiquid, as you know, into something which is far more liquid, far more data-driven, and basically to work on the first step of digitalization, I suppose, which is efficiency.
Hello, I'm Kelly Olsen. I'm CIO and Head of Corporate Programmes at NHS Property Services Limited. And I just add that in there because I sit in this weird world between being a sort of government agency but also being a limited company. We have one shareholder, which is the Department of Health, so all of our profits actually go back to patients, back to the NHS. So I'm taking a company that was formed about 3 years ago from spending less than 0.5% of revenue on IT to a place where they have systems and solutions. We seriously have nothing at this stage. We might have some laptops on desks, but we don't have collaboration tools, we don't have modern digital technologies, we don't have solutions to manage our portfolio of assets. So a dream job transformationally for me, because it's kind of a green field, but there's a few ugly rocks with things crawling out from underneath, but it's an interesting journey and we're quite a long way into our transformation in the year that I've been there.
Kelly's transformation sounds like the theme. So Conor Whelan, I'm the Group CIO of JLT, who are a global insurance broker. I'm new into role. I'm 15 months into the insurance industry, and I've come left field. I've come from the logistics world. So I spent 25 years in technology and logistics, and I made the decision to move sector. A lot of people told me it wasn't possible. It is possible, let me tell you. The problems are exactly the same, and we're on a transformation journey. So I've got a slightly different problem. Our IT costs are too high, so we're 10% of revenue, IT spend. So my transformational journey is how do I optimize the organization? How do we get some standardization across the board? And to your point in what keeps me awake at night, it is cyber. You know, where is my critical data? Who has access to it? How do we respond when we get an incident? And how do we protect ourselves? So hopefully we'll touch that a bit further in more detail as we go through today.
Thank you, Conor. So maybe if we just cover, I think from a CIO's perspective, there are, I guess, a couple of elephants in the room. Maybe we'll cover the first one. 2016 was, quote unquote, a decisive year for democracy, depending on what papers you believe and your personal perspective. But what I'd like to ask the panel is, what is their view on Brexit and Brexit plus in the US, and what does, that post-Brexit landscape mean for your industry and your organisation? So maybe we'll start with yourself, Conor.
Yeah, sure. So as an organisation, we went public. We were actually a Brexit supporter, which was fairly controversial in our industry. And we're actually been proactively planning for it for about the last 12 months. So we're actually setting up a new European headquarters, and we're migrating capacity and capability into mainland Europe. And we've actually seen quite a positive upside. I know we might be different to a lot of other organisations in the room, but for our industry, we've actually seen a big positive upside actually having a mainland European presence. We don't have too much industry. It's not a big insurance market today. London is the largest market in the world, but we do see there's a huge upside to actually having a presence there. The challenge it gives us, though, however, is actually finding the talent. How do we find the talent in a new market where we have got very little presence? We haven't got an unrecognised brand. So we're doing a lot of marketing today in Europe to try and create that talent pool, to create the capability, because we've actually said we don't necessarily want to create the presence until we've actually got the right capability. So that's a timing issue for us, but we actually will make the investment ahead of any decision. And the big question mark is, when will the decision be made? Either way, and we don't know. So we've actually made the difficult decision to say we're going regardless of what the decision is. So that will be something that only time will tell whether our strategy is actually correct.
Kelly, from your perspective?
Brexit is interesting for what is essentially an England company. So we have one hospital in Wales that we look after, but all the rest of our properties are across England. But what it does mean is there's going to be more pressure on funding. So for the hospitals, the CCGs, for GPs, for health centres, for clinics, it's going to be extremely difficult. So our part to play in that is to rationalise the estate to get the best value out of it. And that can be done. We only have about 10% of the NHS estate at the moment, and we know we can make huge savings on behalf of our customers if they allow us if they allow us to do that. There's a whole 5-year forward view produced by the government for the NHS, and a lot of that is about creating centres of excellence for cancer and those types of things. And actually, for me, I think that's a really sensible way forward. So if you need specialist care, you go to a specialist unit, and it might be quite a long way from where you live, but you're going to get the best care possible. And if you need something more minor, then you'll have local community clinics and hospitals to serve you. So our part to play in that is to help find the right properties, find the right solutions. But there will be, no doubt, I think, through Brexit, more pressure on funding. And as you know, the NHS is in severe deficit already.
Thank you, Kelly. Jean-Francois, your perspective from, a European, or you're based in Paris on Brexit?
Apologies.
I
I came unarmed.
It's not your fault.
Working in the investment management industry with a client base which is composed solely of institutional clients, I suppose Brexit is a big question mark in terms of what the future is going to be for the UK and for the real estate market in the UK, which basically means London for that kind of clients. So I guess first thing is the political local climate doesn't give us much clarity to what it will be in the future. It seems that from an economical perspective that there might be growth might be subdued for couple of trimesters going forward. But nevertheless, London and the UK at large is such a huge, mature investment market for properties that it is very difficult to think that that will fade away with time. So it's only a matter of betting on that uncertainty period being over and coming back to something which is possibly different, but would certainly bring the investment performance that we can deliver.
Thank you. Sandra, really good to get your perspective, having worked for BP, a global perspective, what the change in, I guess, for the new president-elect in the US, what that means for the UK trading relationship.
So I think large enterprises like BP, because we're a multinational, we already have big presence in a lot of these countries, and certainly in Europe a huge presence. So I think it's less about us, as like Conor's company, creating that presence. For BP and other big enterprises, it's all about how we don't really know what Brexit is, right? So it's all going to be about, over the next period of time, is unpicking and working out what we've got where and how that might be impacted. Data privacy, for example. We've all spent the last number of years preparing ourselves for the whole data privacy rules that are coming out of Europe, and all of a sudden, do we know if that's right or wrong? Where does all of our data sit? But we don't actually know what the outcome will be and what the impact of that will be. So I can see, from an enterprise perspective, we're spending a period of time now just gathering all of our information so that when something does happen, we know what to tackle and how to tackle it. I think when it comes to the outcome, sort of with Donald Trump now being the president, where we previously had this, was it UK will be at the back of the queue for trade agreements. UK could now possibly be at the front of the queue for trade agreements. CIOs are now more than ever have got this fantastic opportunity to be engaged in that whole economic discussion and not the technology side only. So this is all about how we all engage from, call us IT, into what is the future going to be? What's the impact of these economic decisions going to be? Because they're huge. And it's not only that, but we might have Marine Le Pen come into France. We might have other bits, Frexit. We went through the whole Grexit bit, and what was the impact of that? So I think as CIOs and as IT people, we're getting much more a depth of understanding of how economic policies and changes are affecting us.
Okay, thank you, Sandra. So to really move on and look at the digital transformation, 50 years ago we had the moon landing, one big step for mankind. Today, that digital transformation, most of us, all of us, have more processing power in our iPhone than they had for the Mars or the Apollo 11 landing. So we are on a significant transformation. So my question to the panel, do we expect to see the same benefits and transformation with digital as we have seen with other technologies over the last 50 years? And maybe, Kelly, can we get your perspective?
I think I would look at it quite specifically in that the Internet of Things is going to bring a massive change to property and the way that we run property. Getting that kind of data from the systems within a property will enable us to make much better decisions. I mean, I can think of lots of benefits throughout if I specifically stick with the NHS, about the number of digital things that we could put in place that will then gather the data to enable us to make much better decisions about how many people use it, where to put services, where the best site is for a maternity service, for example, and that has already started. So ambulances you see sitting on the side of the road are there because of digital transformation, the ability to route them to the right place and be in the right place to be the quickest to get to a certain place. So I see more of that happening in our, and very specifically when it comes to building management, Internet of Things. Of course, that brings with it security issues, and I'm sure we'll talk about that later. Yeah.
Jean-Francois, you're coming in from, I guess, a real estate business or asset business.
Yes.
Can we get your kind of view on your thoughts around the digital transformation for your industry?
I guess it's a rather, as I was saying, rather old-fashioned type of industry. It takes months to transfer an asset from an owner to a new owner. And it takes hours of lawyers and notaries, and what we all experience in our personal lives is just 10 times bigger and more complex. So there are people saying that obviously it won't change. Fair enough. That data is not there. Fair enough. And I think it's completely true that data is not there, but it's completely wrong to think that it will not be there. So we're seeing now trends in that market that are really going in the same directions, which are data becoming available to all because they're being collected. They do exist, but they're so scattered, and format and form and shape are so different. So there will be a time when we can compare to the mainstream asset classes like bonds and equities. There will be sometime, someday, a Bloomberg or a Reuters for real estate. Transactions are being accelerated through blockchains. There are a couple of initiatives in the county of Chicago in the US and in Sweden, where you can really literally buy and finance a house in 3 days versus 3 months, just because it goes through blockchain and the land register and the bank and yourself and the seller and all that. So this is changing, plus platforms. If you want to rent space, if you've got space to rent, today it's like I know someone I could call, and then by word of mouth you find someone, which is so inefficient. So speed, data, liquidity are coming. Now, there is some inertia that we need to take on board. I don't think that this is going to happen next year. We just need to be ready for the next 5 years, because this will be the time where it should be there, really.
Okay, thank you. I can see we've got a number of crowdsourced questions, so thank you. So maybe we can take the first one. So first question from Anonymous. We're not very good at naming ourselves here, are we? There's a trend. But first one from Anonymous. Sounds like the hacking group. But it is, how have the panel been affected by the current digital skills gap, and what should be done to address this? Conor, did you want to take that one?
Good question. Who rose that one? We had the same debate internally. I had a board meeting 12 months ago. The board said, Conor, we need to be digital. Right, okay. What does that mean? So I'd be interested to see your own organisation's view. What is digital? Get them to actually write the paper. What does digital mean for your organisation? Because they asked me to write the paper. And I said, I'll do it. I said, but can I have some input first? And I didn't even get one single side of A4 back from the board. So we did think long and hard. And we've created a digital strategy. And then it was about, okay, so how are we actually going to enable it? How are we going to implement it? And it was back to talent. How do we find the talent? Before I touched on the talent, we had another challenge, which is around two-speed. Because our existing operating model of how we traditionally create and deliver services just isn't quick enough to actually work in a digital age. So we're actually, I had the conversation with Sandra over dinner last night, trying to figure out actually how do we create a secondary capability to be able to support the digital engagement with the business. There are many different books out there, so we're adopting the sort of greenhouse approach, which is to have a bolt-on capability, but it still has to come back into governance within the organisation, whether that's enterprise architecture, whether it's finance, whether it's security. It can't be a complete separate silo in our industry, and that's the way that we've looked at it. And there's no right and wrong answer. But the talent, we're going to the market across the whole business. So we think we've got some really good talent within the organisation. And there's two phases of digital for us. There's the ideation phase, then there's the minimal viable product phase. So ideation is how do you get the ideas out of the business? We've got an open platform. Anyone in the organisation can submit ideas across the whole organisation, from the guys that look after the service and the PCs right up to the main board. We then got a funnel process to take the ideas down into select the top 50. We take them through a boot camp. We run through the boot camp, typical X Factor, Dragon's Den type solution. And we pick then the top 8 to 10. They'll then go through a phase then of some funding, some seed funding, to create an MVP, a minimal viable product. They've got 12 weeks maximum to create it. We've brought a third party in to help us through that process, so because we haven't got these skills ourselves. So the first 12 months, that's the journey we're going on. In that time then, we're actually building up our own capability. And we're going to the junior generation. So we're going to guys who are under 30 deliberately from a development perspective, creative perspective. But it's a multi-talented team. So they're not all developers and coders. They're not all architects. We've got storytellers, creative writers. We've actually got a couple of people out of the film industry that we're interviewing at the moment to actually look at the user experience. Because the technology part of it is relatively straightforward. It's quite easy. But actually creating the right user experience is the hardest part. And we don't believe those skills sit within the technology function. And it has to be a true cross-functional team, which is quite alien and different to how IT departments have traditionally been set up.
I completely agree with Conor. I think that model really works, and it's certainly working for me. And having subject matter experts who are not necessarily techie, but have that ability and working across. I work across the whole business to bring that together, and having a kind of hot house of, we're doing a transformation. We've got 40 people in another space working, delivering this, and the reason we're delivering it successfully is that's all they're focusing on. But you're right, it has to come back into the governance of the overall organisation. We're lucky we haven't got much to come back into, but I'm sure you have.
Thank you, Kelly. I guess that takes us on to our next question around talent to the panel. What's your view on Google G Suite versus Microsoft 365 for the digital transformation of your workforce? Any?
I have no view. It's technology.
I can talk. We've recently, we're just starting to roll out Office 365. We're taking the whole suite, everything from SharePoint to Yammer to Skype for Business. Early days, and one of the reasons that we're not rolling it out immediately, because you can actually do it quite quickly, is we're also replacing allocations. So as we replace allocations, we'll roll out collaboration tools. This is in an organisation where they don't even pick up the phone to each other. That they never speak to each other. They send an email and then sit back and wait for it to come back to them. And we looked at Google G Suite and we looked at Office 365. We felt we could get better value with Office 365. It was more ubiquitous. I'm not saying that Google wouldn't do just as good a job, but it was more familiar to the people in the organisation. It meant that we could roll it out much more quickly. And that was the decision. It was based on being able to roll it out quickly and also get some significant discounts that we enjoy as part of a government organisation.
I've got a different perspective, Ian. I at the last organisation at TNT, we did the comparison, and we actually allowed the business to be part of that decision-making process. They picked Google as the product. But when it came down to the raw commercials and total cost of ownership, actually Microsoft was actually won out because they wouldn't be beaten on price. So I think you've got to look at it, yes, from a usability perspective, but in the position that we all sit in, you've got to look at the commercials as well. And it's an important part of looking at your total cost of ownership. So that was the main driver for us as well, because functionality, Microsoft will win out on the productivity tools. Email is a no-brainer. It's Google, hands down, 10 out of 10. Yeah. But when you put it all together and look at the TCO, I think it's it's a very interesting dynamic. And that all then depends on what cycle that you're purchasing in the market, which is another influencing factor. But it's an exercise that you should go through. I would recommend everybody to go through it and put them both head to head, because you'd be amazed at actually how much extra value you can get out of either organisation.
Thanks, Conor. Jean-Francois?
Yeah, the only comment I wanted to make is, it's quite an interesting question. We talk about digital, so we're basically talking about that kind of solutions which are, banned by regulators, financial regulators in many countries, because data protection and stuff. So, and that would be the case for any fintech. Basically, they're using technologies that you're not able to bring in-house. So that's my question to the audience. I mean, what can we do to crack this and to move forward?
Thank you. The next question from our crowdsourcing audience is, in terms of your digital assets, how do you balance the speed of transformation you are trying to achieve with the need to maintain security over your digital assets? Sandra, did you want to take that one initially?
Yeah, so the security of your digital assets. So I've been in IT for a long time, and we went through this whole cycle of we try and protect everything. Yeah, we used to try and build this huge Great Wall of China firewall around everything. And over the years, we've realized, it's not possible to protect everything. So we tried to go down and protect the bits that we thought mattered. And at the same time, we were doing this through waterfall cycles, and we're chucking a lot of protection at things and forcing people to do things slowly. I think as you look at the speed of transformation, I mean, it's everything's like agile and moving forward. This is where the whole bimodal comes in, choosing which bits you do agile, choosing which bits you perhaps still have to take a waterfall approach on. Because there are still very valid, if you've got big capital expenditure, then you're probably best on something like a waterfall. So, you know, for me, is how do you balance it? Security to me is all about your policies. You can't protect on everything. It's how you recover from something. Your weakest link is the employee that accidentally presses. You can't protect against everything. You can't. You know, and it's very, very likely that you've got people in your organisation hacking. You haven't even got a clue about it. You might never have a clue that they were there, that have already infiltrated. So, I mean, to me, it's you know, you continue to do your best on security. You continue to have your plan B. You accept that you will be hacked at some point. You accept that you have got some sort of a recovery plan and a press plan around it. And at the same time, you get out there and you're pushing forward on transformation because, you know, you've got to. The business has got to survive. It's got to get ahead. So for me, it's, you know, they're together, but they're not together. Yeah.
Conor, maybe just take that question further. You mentioned that you had cybersecurity had the potential, if it wasn't already, to give you sleepless nights. So what could be done from your perspective? What's your
I'm
view?
just looking around the room, and my CISO is actually in the room. So Barry and I are front and centre at this with the board as we speak. I think a lot of it starts with what's the risk appetite of the organisation. You know, we've been going around the organisation at the moment and saying, you know, what's important to you? And then it's a relatively simple framework that you can go through to understand about what's the cost, the impact to the organisation, brand reputation, financial impact, disruption to your business. If if anyone that's, God forbid, has been through a cyber attack, it's a painful experience. And you have to focus so much attention to fix the root cause of the problem rather than actually and take investment away from other transformational activities. So I'd say just get out and start talking to the business because it's not a big, scary topic. It's actually a business problem. It's not an IT problem. And we're starting to broaden it in our organisation. It's not just about cyber security, it's information security. And as Sandra said, how do you protect the silly things happening in your organisation of people taking the data out with them, which is not a cyber attack coming from the external, coming into your organisation, it's internal out. And that's something that's throughout the whole organisation, not just IT. So I think, you know, we've broadened the topic. We've certainly started with what's the risk appetite, and then we've built the defences around it. As Sandra said, you can't protect everything. You missed that famous saying in Armageddon, you know, so big space and you're only looking at one side of it. It's no different. So we're protecting what's critical and important to us, and the rest of it, we're accepting the risk. But then how do you respond to it? What's your incident response? What extra intel are you getting from the market? Threat protection, threat detection, and then taking that intelligence and having a process of continually improving and talking to the business. This is what we're seeing, this is what's happening. Do we think there's going to be an issue? So it's a constant dialogue. But we were starting from a low maturity base. And I think having this sort of security experts in the organisation is really critical and making sure they're aligned.
I mean, you just touched around on incidents. I think so many companies you see don't actually have a well-thought-through plan as to what will happen in terms of, we saw it with TalkTalk, it was like pretty poor as the response as that went. In BP, of course, we had Deepwater Horizon, and I see Shiv here. Shiv looked after BP.com at the time, and we were under unprecedented attacks. I mean, every man and his dog in the world hated BP and attacked BP.com. And at the same time, we were trying to hold it up because we were trying to share with the world. You know, you remember the little streaming, all the oil's coming out the Gulf of Mexico floor, and we've got these little ROV units, little mini submarines. We're streaming this live to the world, and every media organisation in the world has got a camera on a streaming live off BP.com. I don't know that you could ever be fully prepared for an incident of that magnitude, but we were very unprepared in terms of who did what, in terms of that response. You know, of course, you've got your media response and your press office response, but I mean, it was just They're used to doing other responses. Do you genuinely know what you're going to do when you have something like that? When you suddenly find all your data's out there or gone, Tesco recently, do you really know?
It's really important. I mean, I come from a sporting background, and I trained all my life. When do you actually train crisis management? When do you actually simulate the bad things that are going to happen? It's such an important part of, I think, governance and corporate governance, that not just the IT function, but the broader business goes through that exercise.
There's a distinct lack of awareness. I mean, we're trying to work across the business. I mean, we didn't even have an IT security role until I joined. And what concerns me, what keeps me awake at night is that we have access to the N3 network, which is the rest of the NHS. We could be seen as a soft target. And we need to make sure that we plug that gap, that we're not the ones that allow in to clinical patient data that we don't have, but obviously other organisations do. And by the way, it wasn't one of my guys that sent that email. Okay, that was the NHS.
You're on camera. Thank you, Kelly. Next question we have is very much around virtual reality. So will virtual reality transform the way we know and use the internet? So could I ask that maybe to Jean-Francois, because I know around the kind of real estate and the business, that's being embraced.
You're right. It being a physical thing, and it's always been part of the pitches that you show pictures of the building. Now, it's only pictures, and it sounds very old again. So we're now planning on using drones to have slightly more modern views on buildings, but it's the same story again, somehow with more dynamic flavor to it. So virtual reality is something that we're seeing now for individuals. If you want to buy a flat, you are really capable in some websites to visit the flat literally without moving from your coach. In the institutional business, it's slightly different. They're not so much interested in that kind of fancy stuff. I suppose you have children. I have children. I suppose like mine, they've been playing with Pokemon Go too much. But that was really, I think, a very. That's the marking between the past and the future, where you mix everything and you build an experience that is so enticing that it really drags people. So I can't tell you what it will be in the real assets investment world, but I can't believe that it will not happen. And one last comment may be that there was 1 year ago, 2 years ago, everything was about big data. Okay, we're seeing now everything being about virtual reality. Fair enough, just climbing on the curve and down and stuff, but nevertheless, it's there.
But in commercial, I worked for Cushman & Wakefield, a commercial real estate company, before I joined Property Services, and we were absolutely developing virtual reality. We were lucky to work with an incubator startup, lots of products coming out. We're using drones, obviously, but more importantly, things like when you need to fix and for compliance reasons, actually walking around, being able to real-time look at a boiler and those kind of things. It's actually, absolutely, and I can see that growing and growing and growing within the industry.
Conor or Sandra, any points to add on virtual reality?
I see it as one more step in that direction. 5 years from now, we'll look back and say, virtual reality, it's a bit like what DOS used to be or something, because we'll be well ahead of that. Is it happening? Yes. Are we all finding new ways of doing it? Yes. Is it helping us on our transformation journeys and getting people's heads around what digital and the potential of digital is? Yes. People are now, so much more open as to what's you have a certain expectation now when you go on the internet and look at sites. If I was to look at a house, of course I'd expect to do a walkthrough. I look at hotel rooms, for goodness sake. Before I choose my hotel room, I want to walk through it. So it's just more and more.
Just made a point about Pokemon Go. I think it's really insightful. It sounds like a really silly thing, but I think that certainly my board, because their children are using it, that it's almost like a light has gone on, with a very undigital board. It's quite surprising. Yeah. Sorry.
No, I have nothing further to comment apart from I'm just nervous how far will it go, and we'll lose that human interaction, and that's my sort of worries. At what point does it go too far? But I do see some great advances. We're in the insurance industry, we sell risk insurance, and actually having access to that data so the brokers can actually advise the underwriters as to what risk they're taking on board, what is the state of a property or a ship. Fantastic, real time, but at what point are we going to lose that interaction to really talk about the risk?
And there's already evidence, isn't there, where younger people are perhaps not having the same socially developed skills because everything is very much online and sort of in your head. And whilst they're coming out of schooling and those years very mature in their use of internet, relatively immature in being able to read people's body languages because they're not used to doing that face-to-face solid interaction. There's a lot of evidence that that's now starting to appear.
Yeah, we're the ones at fault. We're too old and we need to be put on the spot.
Okay, thank you. I think the next one's interesting, very much about the CIO's relationship with the board. So how do you sell the cloud to security paranoid executives? Anybody want to take that one?
I'm not one to answer that because they don't know anything about it, so it's quite easy.
Yeah, I think it's how you. I don't think the executives are quite security paranoid enough. I think everybody seems to be engaged in cloud, and I think it's there's, like you were saying, children at home, they're all doing it, and everybody thinks cloud is the hot new thing. I think it's. I think security on the board is still not mature enough by any means. The cloud itself and apps and everything else that's going out there, your business is probably out of control right now. It's like sweeties in a shop, isn't it? And they've been given free run on it. So, I don't know. I would like to see a little bit more security paranoia in the exec team.
Yeah, me too.
I won't swear, but we used cow manure bingo. There's all the different words, and cloud is another one that at the board that they heard. We've got to be in the cloud. And again, what does cloud mean? And certainly the board I inherited didn't understand it. And for me, it's just a cheaper compute platform. It's regardless of where it's at. So we've turned it around. We've stopped talking about cloud. We've started talking about total cost of ownership for the services, access, and security is just a different dimension. What's our risk appetite? It's back to that same dimension. What's our risk appetite based on that, based on our standards? Where's the best place to provision services? Because you can have an on-prem, a private, hybrid, whatever you want to call it, and public. It's just access to the information, and we've been training them to understand it's about the price of the compute platform, not necessarily call it cloud. And it's changed the discussions then because we've started looking at these services and the total cost of ownership of the services and what that means to them, rather than saying we need to be in the cloud. So it is educating them, and it's all about educating the board.
Jean-Francois, AXA in your industry, are they on board with the cloud, or are they in the paranoid camp?
Interestingly enough, I mean, I buy infrastructure from my shareholder. My shareholder was discovering cloud and was willing to go their own way and pick their own provider and build a very tall and thick wall around it so that it looks like everything we've known before. So everything on premises, but let's call it cloud. And then the AXA group said, by the way, you just forget about that. And you'd use what we're about to put in place, which is partnering with an external vendor, which is one of the big ones on the market. So I think this is the very modern way to do it. It's super computer platform. It's also a way to give responsibility and expertise where it belongs, where there are efficiencies of scale, and then concentrate on what we should be doing, which is to basically align with the business and transforming the business. So it's a heavy weight on our shoulders, which could go away to some extent if we learn how to work with them.
Okay, thank you. We'll just take one more question from our Slido. So the next one we've got, what are the expectations of CIOs with regards to bandwidth and connectivity in relation to the cloud shift and digital transformation? So what are the expectations of CIOs with regards to bandwidth and connectivity in relation to the cloud shift and digital transformation? Anybody have a view on that one?
Whether you want it or not.
And if someone
Whether
could fix
it's
my home broadband, that'd be fantastic.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a difficult balance, because if you have got people who are at home who have fantastic service and they come into the office and do you know what, it's poor, that's just not right. So yeah, more, faster, quicker, better, cheaper, absolutely.
But so you can tell from my accent, I come from the north, right? And where I live, we don't have any broadband. There is none. We don't have mobile signal. We don't have broadband. And you know what? It is so hard for rural communities now. It disadvantages children. People can no longer engage. So you try doing something now without online access. Farmers, they're supposed to be putting in all of their grant applications online. You can't, right? If you haven't got that access, you can't. You have so many services now where it says, 5% more if you have to do it by paper. There's a whole swathes of the country right now are totally disadvantaged of being cut out and just not having that future, because broadband has now become as important as the electricity. So, for me, roll on Brexit, get some funding in the north, get us some decent connectivity, put that on the camera.
Just take this one question, actually. What does the panel think the critical success factors are for an accelerated transformation are? And that's from Shiv Kaur, former CIO at BP. So that's one for you. Sandra, do you want to quickly take that one?
Yeah, so critical success factors for me are you must have support from the top, because any transformation, for me, transformation means you are affecting the business model. It's not just a project. You are transforming something in the business, most likely the structure of the business model. Support from the top, cross-department governance, true governance. And this is not just like your project governance board, but a real understanding of who's got what authority to make what decisions. That changes throughout the life of your transformation. True commitment, so that people are aligned. It's not just you're going and begging some time off people, get it onto their performance contracts or whatever it is that you do to measure them. And by doing that, you actually start to create that whole transformation activities. It's not about the technology, it's about getting people on board, getting people to start moving with you. Because often now digital transformation is about putting your company on the side. Right? You're crossing boundaries, you're crossing silos. People have to give up things. People have got to let go things for the success of the company. So that's critical for me.
Thank you. And my one last question to my fellow panelists. 2017 and beyond. In 3 words, what does the future hold? Conor, if we could start with you.
Complexity. More and more of it. It's part of life. So that'd be the first one. The second one is engagement with the business. No longer can we be seen as, IT technology leaders. We are business leaders. We have to transition to be business leaders. If you want that seat at the board, stop talking technology. Really learn about the industry, the business that you're in. I very rarely, 90% of my conversations at the board are not about the technology. It's about actually how we're actually going to win business. Technology is the easy part. It should be. And the next, my third worry, Brexit. The uncertainty of it. What will it do? And I'm more concerned about our suppliers. Costs are going up. Costs are going up by some of our suppliers. And that's something that we haven't necessarily had full sight of yet. Sorry, it's more than 3.
Understanding the customer. Absolutely. Engagement across the whole business, and data. So data serves me enables me and the business to make the right decisions.
Thank you. Jean-Francois?
Onboarding hybrids, so people who are cognizant of the business, but also have a very good understanding of IT and all the plumbing that goes with it. But they're not IT techies, they're not business people that don't even know how to turn on their computer. That would be the first thing, and then commitment of those and the fact that they would really be allocated to the transformation rather than having to do it on top of business as usual. And third thing is data as well.
Thank you. Sandra?
So I'd sum up the next 5 years as being rich with opportunity. It's there for the taking. The CIOs absolutely have got to step into that business conversation. Any CIO now that has a technical conversation is in the wrong job. because we are talking about economy, business models, etc. I think, secondly, it's all about the talent. How do you access the right talent? How you bring that talent up? I hate to bring it up, but hey, the gender gap is still massive, and it's like, for goodness sake, we're in 2016 and we've still got this massive gender gap. Girls are not coming out of school and joining in IT. We've got to address it. There's a huge opportunity there. So yeah, and then the whole, the whole how the economy is going. I see Brexit again through eyes from the north. It was a foregone conclusion. Everybody in the north, absolutely, it was out. Because this was a modern-day equivalent of the Jarrah March. The north-south divide was massive. It's the same what's happened in America with Trump. Yeah? He's appealed to those people who felt left behind. So how this now fits with our fourth revolution, if you like, and digitization and everything, it's coming into, Conor, you brought this up earlier, people. It's coming into people. How do you access and bring forward all of the opportunities around digital? And then with the people there, how do you get over the difficulties around globalization, the reality that people's jobs go, and how do you deal with that? We haven't. So that's in the masses of opportunity if we get our heads around it over the next number of years.
Thank you. We're actually hard out of time. Hopefully you found the session interesting. I'd like to thank my fellow panelists for their insight, expertise and candor. So that's Sandra Ashmore, Kelly Olsen, Jean-Francois Teno, jumped you there, and also Conor Whelan. So let's thank the panelists for today's session. Thank you.